All right, so we're going to start by jumping right in, and we're going to discuss the protests and the riots that have swept our country late May and early June. So what are your opinions on the protests and riots? Are the people protesting a separate group from the people rioting, or do you think they're more connected? So anyone want to start?
I'll take the lead. As far as the protest, from what I know, the people that are protesting, that I know personally, are peaceful. So the protest that happened here in Nashville that turned into like a mini riot, from what I know, is that it was pretty much organized. It wasn't the peaceful protesters. It wasn't my friend. So if that makes sense and answer the question.
I can answer that question. You want to Okay. Okay. So the question is whether the protesters and rioters are different folks. That's a really tough question. Very loaded question, because from our news outlets, we've seen that there are two different people, even three levels if you really want to be real about it. But yes. I have to say more, don't I? Okay. Okay, like Iyen was saying, we have our protesters and they're peaceful and they're out there asking for, plain civil human rights. Okay. And we're bringing awareness to this cause. We're not busting out windows and blah, blah, blah. And then you're still going to have your second group of people who are the rioters, and they're kind of taking their angst, which is understandable on some levels, because when you've had enough, and eventually a volcano is going to erupt. And so those are the people who are out there kind of doing the destruction and damage. From what we've heard, there's different groups that are intermingled in that. And so some of them might have a different agenda, which is sometimes, what the rioters are doing. But I hope that answers the question.
Well, also, if I can add, because I didn't really elaborate. When I was speaking about the rioters, from what I know, there was an ad that said that pretty much asked people to come out to riot. And I saw that. So they are very much so separate. But like Isis said, I kind of understand, we're angry, but it's not right. But they are separate, to answer your question. They are not one and the same. Because my friends here are peaceful. My friends that I know, my community, the people that I know, they just won't change. They didn't want to fight. They're tired of fighting. But like I said, I saw an ad in Craigslist asking for people to come out to do destructive things. So they're definitely separate.
The last thing I'm going to say about this situation is that, like I said, that the rioters themselves are a mix of different people. And yes, there are going to be peaceful protesters like us. And I think I'm not old, but I'm mature in age, and I'm not trying to really get out there and run and get tear gas and whatnot. But the younger generations who are intermingled into the rioters, if you will, are not afraid of that. They're going to stand up, and there's going to be some people who are going to stand up and say, we're not taking this anymore, and they don't mind using that kind of violence, or that kind of message that they're trying to send. But like I said, there's an intermingled group within those rioters, and not all of them are the same. So that's all.
Cool. Thank you for the thoughts. We're actually going to move on real quick here. We're going to move into the Black Lives Matter movement. We want to know what you guys think about Black Lives Matter as a movement, and if you agree with their messaging and rhetoric. Whoever wants to start.
Well, I definitely agree with Black Lives Matters. I think that the whole movement is just political, personally, but I do agree with the phrase Black Lives Matter. Not just because I'm Black, but because we all matter. And in history, we haven't really been shown that we do matter. So we need to know that we do as a collective. Everybody agree that, Black people matter. So then we can move on to the next thing or the next race that needs to understand that they matter too. So I think it's very important. And I think it's very important to understand that Black Lives Matter. And I think that this movement, the phrase is really, we really need to take heed to the phrase. But as far as the movement, I think it's political. And it's like T-shirts and stuff. But I think that with the whole movement, it would really make a difference if we can do this. Sit down and talk because Black Lives Matter, White Lives Matter, pink, purple, blue, green, whatever, everybody does matter. But based on history, like I said, we don't know that we do because we've never been, like throughout history, things have happened and we haven't been treated properly. So we need to start there with us. To answer the question, I agree with the phrase. I don't particularly care about the movement because we're really not finding solutions to move forward in peace and love because we need to start there, heal that, and then move forward.
All right, so this next one, we're going to get into some more specifics with Black Lives Matter. So that's why I wanted to ask about the movement aside from just the phrase Black Lives Matter, because Black Lives Matter as a movement has their own website where they even have specific policy proposals that they are pushing for. And so I wanted to ask you guys about a couple of those. So both of these are straight from the Black Lives Matter website. So the first one is the one that recently has gotten popular, defund the police. So recently, we've seen this nationwide movement to defund police departments. Some say this means demilitarizing the police and cutting funding to reallocate some of that spending to other places like education, community programs, maybe replacing police officers with social workers in certain cases, like when people have issues with drug abuse or mental health crises. But then there's others that say that this is just the first step in abolishing the police entirely, and we need to rethink community safety from the ground up. So I wanted to know, do you support any of these policy ideas?
Recently, I just completed 2 years of national service with the Corporation for National Community Services, VISTA, Volunteer in Service to America. I worked in the Nashville Promise Zone. I was a professional volunteer. My first year, I was the crime reduction coordinator. And so we focused on the data in the areas that are high in poverty. And what I know from looking at that information and speaking with the people who live in that area, and part of those people and speaking with the police, I would attend on a regular basis every Friday the CompStat meeting over at the North Precinct. Anybody can go. If you want to know what's on the police mind in Nashville, on Friday at 8 a.m., go to North Precinct. It's out in the open. They'll tell you what's on their mind. So knowing that is, if you have a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. If you are funding police, every problem looks like a policing problem to be solved by policing. I don't think that's true. I think all you get is more enforcement when we don't need more enforcement. So based on my observed experience, I would say that's a fair point of view to reallocate some of the resources from enforcement to support. I think it's asking a lot of a police department to handle all these different things. I don't think it's fair to them, and it's natural for them to not be good at all of it. It just is. So, and also when we think about where policing came from and all this stuff that has happened in life since policing started hundreds of years ago, we just turned to the police and said, do it. So I think there's a valid argument in defunding the police, in meaning not just blind defunding, but if we're going to move money, where are we going to do it mindfully? What's our outcome? Who are we looking to support? Because truly, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. It's expensive to enforce. It's expensive to incarcerate. It's a lot cheaper to support and pour in resources. The facts are there. This is not a question of fact anymore. I don't have it at my fingertips, but building up is way simpler than enforcing. So I'm all for it. I think that's a good thing to do. I don't think we need to abolish policing entirely, and I am skeptical of the militarization of the police force, which can be traced back to the North Hollywood robbery when those guys showed up with fully automatic firearms against revolvers, right? That got messed up. So things took a turn around a cultural event. So if we can fund them based on that, I think we can examine that budget and re-examine how we're going to spend that money in supporting our communities.
What I was going to say is I agree with the defunding. I know I had to actually post something on my page because people basically thought, well, we're going to get rid of the police because you have to do your research in these situations. And so basically the reality is that we don't have school counselors in schools anymore. We don't have school nurses in schools anymore. Guidance counselors. The resources that kids actually need to be able to go and talk to people, they took those out, but they have cops. They have, those type of things. So guess what? I'm not saying, my thing is that we need to reallocate those funds, and I totally agree with what you were saying, Greg, right? Yes, I got it. Okay, but I agree with that as far as saying putting the money where we really need it. Let's do social things for people. Let's have, mental health counselors go out on those type of calls. And of course, if they need an escort, something like that, we can figure something out like that. But let's actually work for humanity instead of against it.
I just want to add one thing to these two individuals. Also, I think it's important that when we're talking about moving money and also allocating or defunding the police, we also need to take into consideration reviewing their policies that are already in place. Because we can take out money, but if they're still doing the same policies, if they're still following the same protocol and procedure, which is use of excessive force or whatever that definition may be to them, if we're still teaching them how to do choke holds and knee holds and things of that nature, nothing has changed. So I think there needs to also be a scrutiny of what their current protocols and procedures are. I know in certain cities already where there has been, after Ferguson, I know Kansas City, Kansas, what they did in their police department, they separated the county into neighborhoods, and each neighborhood would get a liaison from the police department. So if anytime the officers changed, the patrol officers changed the neighborhoods, they had someone they can go to and they could report anything that was out of the ordinary, and they always had something that was still constant. And so changes like this where they're getting the community involved, the community is a part of a lot of their decisions, having a community oversight board with volunteers from the community to look over any cases of police brutality cases, I think could be helpful in Nashville. So in addition to defunding, I think it's important to also look at the root causes and what's already established.
One of the things, just as a disclaimer, I think most of you guys know, well, I know most of the people that are connected to me know, I work in law enforcement. I work for the Davidson County Sheriff's Office here in Nashville. Just to give you an example of how complex something like this could be, one of the things we did at our agency is we know that we should not be housing people with mental health issues. 30% of the people that's in our facility right now should be in a hospital. But if you were honest in Davidson County, if somebody was naked in the park counting birds flying over their heads, most residents of Nashville, Davidson County is not calling the mental health professional. They're going to call the police. They're going to bring that person to the jail, and that person is going to be arrested. They're going to be fingerprinted and booked when they should have been taken to a hospital. Now, there was a time when we were tearing down our old jail and building a new jail. Our sheriff wanted to build a mental health facility beside the new jail. There were people, and I'm not going to say any names, that were in government that sit and deal with our budget, who got mad at him because he wanted to build a mental health facility instead of more jail beds. So what I'm saying is it's way more complex than people think. Now, luckily, we still got to build a hospital. So again, when you say defund police, one of the things you can do, and this is just a very small example of what can happen. We built a thing called the BCC, Behavioral Care Center, right next to the jail. So what happens is now when somebody in Davidson County gets arrested and they come to us, then they pull up to the door and there is a mental health professional there with our officer. The same person, if they get deemed that this person has a mental health issue, that person does not come into our jail. They're not fingerprinted and booked, because every time you get arrested, you get fingerprinted and booked, which is another charge that person has to deal with. Now this person goes into the mental health facility and receives treatment. So when we think about and when people hear the defunding, it is vitally important that we move resources into places where it's most beneficial to community. But we need to be mindful and be in the game as far as where are we going to move it to. Metro Police has a lot of things where they deal with domestic violence in their new facility. Someone that's in an issue where they don't feel safe, they can go there, and there's a whole wing that's connected to getting the woman to a safe place, getting the children to a safe place. So we got to be mindful. If we say defund, we got to say, well, what are we going to defund? You got to be mindful of that, because if they say, let's defund this and keep more officers on the street, we just have to be cautious when we think about it. It's kind of like if you move into old pastor told me, if you go to a new church, don't move nothing for 2 years because you don't know why it's there. So the first step is making sure you know, why is this resource here and what is it protecting? Now, if you find that it's just wasteful, deal with it. But you got to see why it sits there before you start saying, generally defund everything, because it's a reason why it's there.
Cool. All right, cool. So we're going to go on to another policy proposal talked about by Black Lives Matter. So on their website, they list reparations for African Americans. Do you guys support this policy? Do you believe that paying reparations will improve race relationships and the economic status of the African American community?
Yes.
Want to tell me why?
I actually saw something, some kind of meme or something like that, saying that Black folks should be getting our $350,000. Did y'all see that? I saw it. I saw it. Anyway, I think that would be great. I think, hopefully we can kind of build up our communities with that, because at the same time we want to be able to kind of get that money and maybe even our own playing field. And also, it's not about just the money, but it's about the respect, because other cultures have received reparations, but of course we have not. So it's still almost like a slap in the face. Why haven't we? And we still can't even get respect to this day, when we have done so many things. We have been an asset, but at the same time, we're not seen as an asset. So yes, I will take all the money.
So reparations, they say, sounds really good. It really sounds good, but I'm curious to see how those reparations will be paid out specifically, and to whom, because if you look at genealogy, we all go back to this place called the motherland continent. So who's not to say that so-called white people won't come out and say, hey, I got blacks up the line. Where's my reparations? I need mine too. Of course, whites are going to line up and say, hey, we need reparations. We're black up the line. I got blacks in my family. We want ours too. So I'm very curious to see what that would look like. It sounds good though, because who doesn't want $350,000? I'd love for us to take our monies and allocate them, perhaps have our own communities and our own neighborhoods and build our own community and build ourselves up. But who's to say where those funds would go and who they would go to?
Brings to mind what is black, and we often have that conversation because no offense, but she's black, but some people are like lighter than her, and so what is black, so we say, I say yes to the reparations, but then like he said, how are we really going to allocate that, because how are you going to define black? I
can say I'm black. African American, all that. I did my DNA. I'm 85% Nigerian, but I don't speak Nigerian. But I'm learning Nigerian. Amen. Igbo community. That's kind of who I hang out with. But one of the things we have to do, I went into a pawn shop. I was looking for a computer screen, a monitor. And the lady at the pawn shop was like, we don't have anything. We've been cleaned out. And I said, what do you mean? She said, the stimulus checks. She said, everybody's buying everything. But she said, don't worry about it. Just check back with me in 2 months. I said, huh? She said, in 2 months, I'll have everything back. So what happens is, even if you get the 350,000, if you haven't learned or be educated as a community how to manage 350,000, then who gave it to you understands it'll be back in a year or two. So we as a community have to get to a place to where, yes, we want it, but you got to start doing some groundwork stuff to say, what do you do when you get it, and how do you keep it in your family, where then you can start producing generational wealth. But our community has to get better at doing that, having that conversation, and just don't get hyped up in, give me my check. All right? I believe in it. I think people deserve it, because when you look at the historical account of America, there have been checks and welfare checks handed out all across the board. I mean, how you think we move west? People got resources to go out there and develop. They didn't have that money. The white middle class got their things because the government gave them checks to develop. They gave them homes. They gave them the resources to build themselves up. This is a fact. But they educated them along the way. And I'm going to be quiet on it.
Nice. All right, cool. So we're actually going to jump to another topic because there's so much to talk about. It's crazy. All right, so we're going to talk about, first I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if you agree with the following statements. Police brutality, specifically against African Americans, is an epidemic in the United States. The next question, police officers systemically shoot unarmed African Americans.
We see evidence of that. To add to what our pastor said here earlier, I'm going to give you a little story. Before the Rodney King beating went national, at the age of 10 years old, I witnessed an average-sized man be whooped nearly to death by, I believe, what was between 2 and 4 officers. It's kind of gray now to remember the details, but I do remember what happened, and I do remember vividly seeing him being beaten. These cops were each 2 times the size of the rock. And I watched this from the balcony of my home, and I was mortified. My father gave me a coloring book in 1st grade that made me believe Martin Luther King was a god, and he had wiped racism off the face of the earth. At 10 years old, when I had to move into the inner city and took witness of this horrible beating long before Rodney King went national, it rumbled my soul. It crumbled all of the images that my father and the hope that my father instilled in me that it was gone. So by the time Rodney King went national, it was just like the pastor said, I was numb. When it happened, I was like, what do you mean this happens every day? I was so desensitized by the time that came apparent. In the car many times with my own son's father, we were pulled over. I was behind the driver's seat or wheel, if you will. They went to the passenger side and asked him for his license. There is evidence across the country, namely with, his name is Castile, how do you pronounce it? Philando Castile. That's the most important one to me. That video itself, if you go back and watch it detail by detail, is horrific. So there's plenty of evidence among us with people like me who've seen it firsthand, and now the videos that are surfacing to say that there's substance to this is a very systematic demographic issue, and it's hurting largely the people who are in impoverished areas and African American communities.
One of the things words are important, and we have to know that when we talk about law enforcement, I don't care if you're in a police station, I don't care if you're in a church, I don't care if you're in a club, whatever it is you're part of, you're always going to have bad actors. I'm really cautious when I say the police in general, because there are good law enforcement people who do good things in community. Unfortunately, the bad characters get all the love. They get all the noise. They get all the media. But we have to be real careful generalizing and saying all cops. I think you have to look at places where, when you look at law enforcement from the top of the organization down, when you have a lack of diversity, when you have a lack of representation from the community, that's a very dangerous thing. Police departments, fire departments, any kind of public safety agency should be a reflection of the city. If the city has a certain demographic, that agency should look like its city. Most of the time, when it does not, that's when you find that word you were saying, some systematic stuff that may be occurring within, because you have no sounding boards. You have no diverse voice in the room. So you just go on whatever culture it is you came up in. And if that culture was a racist culture, then you'll see that reflective within that community or that agency.
So our final topic today is going to focus on the African American community at large. We're wondering what you think, again, are the biggest issues facing the African American community today.
It's self-love. It's the biggest issue. And I know a lot of us argue, well, how can Black Lives Matter when y'all killing each other and y'all... But like Issa said, if we're operating in fear on a daily and we're having someone else enforcing that fear on us, and we're already struggling with loving ourselves. And if you can imagine a young man, he's already feeling, he's scared, and he's taught not to cry, not to feel scared. He lives in these low-income communities, so he has a lack of resources, right? And most of them are malnourished. Like I said, they don't love themselves. So when they're faced with somebody, they already got that self-hate going on, right? So when they're faced with, they already and have that anger, and they're faced with someone that looks like them, and they already hate themselves, they're going to kill them, of course, right? And so like I said, I hear people always talking about, well, how Black Lives Matter when y'all killing each other. Well, I often tell them that because we don't understand how to love ourselves. We don't. So it's a deeper issue. So in the community, we need to start with self-love, teaching that. Teaching meditation. This might sound kind of hippie, but I believe in it. And really teaching our kids and families about our Creator. Just teaching us how to love ourselves, how to accept ourselves. And I think that would begin to heal some hurt and begin to put us on the right path. So self-love is my answer.
So I've been volunteering with Project Connect Nashville. They're a nonprofit here in the community. They're headquartered right now in Madison, also in the Woodbine area. Ever since after the tornado in March, we've actually set up in the 37208 zip code in partnership with one of the churches out there, the First Historic Community Church on Knowles. And so I've been out there almost every single day since March after the tornado, helping get supplies out, helping tarp roofs, getting debris from neighborhoods, delivering meals, so all these things. And from my interactions and seeing people come in and come out, and providing resources, not just food and monetary, but educating them about applying for FEMA or applying for assistance. So there's a lot of misinformation that has been getting shared to these communities, and because of that misinformation, they feel discouraged. They'll apply for FEMA and maybe not submit everything, and so they'll get rejected. And then at that point, they'll just stop and they'll give up. Whereas it takes really 3 times, they have to keep appealing for them to finally get the assistance they need. So from other volunteers' experience and my experience, we see a lot of these individuals just very discouraged after they don't get the help they're seeking, or they're getting information they're not misinformation, they're not getting updates. The FEMA deadline was extended, and a lot of them didn't know about that either. So it's just getting the right information out to these communities so they can empower themselves and they can take action to help themselves.
Cool. So you guys are already kind of answering the question, but I'm going to phrase it even more specifically. We're wondering what are the possible solutions to help struggling communities? How do we open more businesses, create more jobs, make sure more kids graduate high school and go to college?
One of the things when we're talking about the Black community, we're always still connected to community. It's going to take not only Black people working together, it's going to take a community that is committed to seeing Black people be successful. And those kind of things is really a loaded question, which could be a conversation within itself. It could be its own show, because there are so many moving parts that could add to the success of Black people. But there are so many moving parts that are designed to dismantle Black community. So if you look and go across Martin Luther King Bridge, our public school system closed down 3 schools in a Black neighborhood. Those dollars that came from the federal government that was for priority schools, and if somebody says priority, they should be the number one thing on your list. This city shut down 3 priority public schools in a Black community. Now those kids are going to go to a charter school. Not against charter schools, but charter schools are owned by private entities and corporations. I'm not sure when you say, I want to support a community, and you take millions of dollars out of the community, you take education out of the community, and then turn around and say, well, this is why we did it. When you have a state that says, I'm going to take public dollars that taxpayers paid and give it to private schools, which already have money, and we're going to close down a bunch of failing public schools, but it's a whole nother story to say, how did them schools become a failing public schools? That's a whole nother sitcom or whatever we're going to call this. But we got to keep that in mind. It's going to take a community as a whole. There's this thing I call the silent majority. There's a silent majority of white people who know what the right thing is, but they're quiet. Instead of taking action and saying, hey, guys, we just got to do the right thing. That audience is way bigger than the audience that's making a bunch of noise. But until that audience says, we're going to be fair across the board, and we're going to partner with the Black community and help them be successful, then that's when the change is going to come. But you're going to have to pay people that's going to really make a commitment to be able to do that.
Oh, I have to add to that. Give me a second, because you can't summarize all of that. To add to what he just said, let's think about what he said. You took 3 public schools out of a community. Then you're gonna, what is it called when they bus them somewhere else? Have you not just disrespected one of their other rights? Every American citizen in the United States is entitled to a public education. Why did you just take, and this might get political, this might stir things up, but why did you just take 3 schools from an isolated community, take them away, then not replace them with something sufficient or better to improve their quality of life? And instead, you're taking them outside of their community, sending them to school with people they don't know, they can't identify with, according to legalities, Every American citizen is entitled to a public education. So you took that away from them if you're sending them to a private school. What does that say about our policies and legalities in America? We have to be accountable. We have to have measurable outcomes in our community. We have to fully understand what it is we need to bring to the table to have those measurable outcomes, to really make a difference that the community that we're helping can embrace. If we're not doing that, we're serving them an injustice, an inaccountability, and we're making them feel totally ostracized.
And to piggyback on all those comments too, on a macro level, those who are successful or have positive outcomes in those matters that you're talking about have access to capital. They have access to capital. Now, how you get access to capital, that's the real answer to this question, and it's a long one, especially when groups have been literally explicitly blocked and barred from developing or having access to capital. So if anyone's listening and wants to think about it, your North Star is, how do we get capital into communities and build that generational wealth? That's a good thing to think about. And then those who live that experience will have answers. And then I'm here to tell you, because I've seen it with my own eyes, is when they have an answer, listen, it's the answer, not your answer. Don't hope that they come up with your answer. When they have the answer, it's the answer, whether you like it or not. It's the answer. I've witnessed it with my own eyes.
Okay, so we're all familiar with the industrial prison complex, that was called. And perhaps we've heard of the school to prison pipeline. So these are things that we have to definitely think about and talk about and bring to the forefront when we're talking about why certain communities are disproportionately lesser or poorer than others. Because there's a system set up for certain people to fail. We should all acknowledge that. It's obvious because people are making money off of the industrial prison complex, for example. So we can't not mention that, because that's certainly part of it. These huge corporations are investing into certain people's being derailed and going and being in prison because they're making money off of it. That's the whole thing. Okay, so that's one of the reasons right there. A lot of look at this the amount of people who are in prison and what their race is versus others. For example, obviously most of the people in prison are brown and black people, Hispanics and so-called blacks versus whites. But however, if we look at the number of people in the country, in terms of how many whites are in the country, are whites not the majority in America? So there's a disproportion there in terms of the people who are behind bars and who are in crime and who are in prison. So that's certainly part of it in terms of why I feel like certain communities are disproportionately less or poorer or they don't have as many resources as other communities, because there is a system put in place to subjugate certain people who make money.
And we need loans.
Access to capital.
Yes, exactly. So like when people come in and they're, they immigrate in or whatever, and they have the loans that they're able to get when they come in, that's exactly what we need access to, capital. So
Can I ask you to elaborate on what you mean by loan?
yeah, access to capital. Yeah.
Sorry,
But so
say that.
loans, so for business purchases, for home purchases, for going to college, for all those type of things.
So-
Access to the money so we can actually level ourselves up, to get to the next level.
I would agree, but another topic, mental health and financial literacy, are at the top of the board in order for you to be a productive citizen. If you teach people to take out loans in some form or respect, if the loans aren't dynamically set up for them to prosper, it's a form of slavery. And gambling, because you're gambling on paying something back in the future for which you can't project. So when you encourage people to take out loans, you're not allowing them to sustain a capital that will take care of them for the rest of their lives. And I think that's a growing issue among the entire American population, but it's very absent in our inner city communities where there's multicultural people from all around the world affected.
When we talk about, again, money, access to capital, these are things that we have to keep in mind and understand. It is one of those things that is systematic in helping certain communities and in harming certain communities. When we talk about access to capital, I think Greg is talking about there are people, if you look at 37218, we the only part of Davidson County that has land left. Everything else is pretty much saturated. But access to capital means this. There's somebody that's driving through Bordeaux right now, and they're looking at every raggedy house, vacant house, good house, and they're looking to see how much of that they can get their hands on. Because this is the only way you can build in Davidson County now. I remember Germantown when it was Salem Town. Germantown did not look like it looks now. Germantown used to be a black community. Access to capital says I can go into Germantown and I can go get a loan to buy a lot and put it next to Miss Rose's house and put a $400,000 house on that lot. But if Miss Rose go to that same bank and say, hey, I want to get this loan to be able to put the $400,000 house and put a grandma suite on the back where I can live in that and keep the money that I made off of this other house, she can't get that loan. She can't even have access to the capital to get that loan. But if you go fair across the board and you give her access to the capital, I promise you, Miss Jones will build the same nice house. She don't want to stay in a raggedy house. But if somebody says, okay, we're going to give you a low interest rate and we're going to give you an interest rate that's out the ceiling, that's not fair when you're talking about things that are across the board. So there are many people. Nashville is a prime example. Access to capital means something. Don't think these new communities that's popping up just appeared. The Gulch was a project to get people to come to Nashville. 3 families actually built the Gulch. They have the capital to build it. And when people come visit Nashville, investors that they want to invest in this city, they take them downtown and they show them the Gulch. Access to capital.
I think when we think about capital, a lot of people don't know when you're raising capital for a business, it doesn't also have to come from a loan. It can come from investors, and there's a couple of different types of investors, and one of which I want to highlight is angel investors. Now we have to look to our angel investors and ask them, where are you in our communities? Where are you when it matters? Where are you when you're coming as a third party into a community of people that already live there and you're asking them to move out? Or you're using forceful mechanisms and persuasive mechanisms to move them out? So that's what we have to ask. When are we going to invest in our community? When are we going to stop asking people to pay us back? If we invest in our communities now, we invest in our future, and we won't ever have to ask anyone to pay us back because it'll follow the circle of life and give us reciprocity. I do believe in that.
All right. So I think we have to end it there, but thank you guys, everyone, for coming today and participating. I really hope that everyone walks away today feeling like we had a good discussion. Maybe they learned a little something. And for those that are watching at home, we encourage you to leave a comment, tell us what you think, and continue fostering open conversation within your own circles and communities. So thank you, everyone.
Put the cameras off, we can say what we really want to say.
All right.